So again, for this problem, we have a polynomial with four terms, the highest power being the third power, x to the third, and we want to factor this polynomial. So again, we want to use the strategy factor by grouping. And so remember from the last problem that we did, we're going to group the first two terms, and we're going to group the last two terms, or the set of two terms that are at the end. And so we're looking first of all at the x to the third minus x squared, and we want to figure out what the greatest common factor of x to the third and x to the second power is. So the greatest common factor is going to be x squared. And so once we factor that out of x to the third minus x squared, that's going to leave us with x minus 1. Because if you divide away x squared from x to the third, it leaves you with x. If you divide away x squared from itself, or a negative version of itself, it leaves you with a negative 1. So now notice this is different than the first problem we did. The last two set of terms are the minus 5x plus 5. So this time we have a negative in front of the term, the linear term, or the term with just an x to the first power. And so what we're going to do is we're going to factor out a negative 5, because 5 would be the greatest common factor of 5x and 5. But since we have a negative in front of our third term, we want to include that with what we factor out. So dividing away or factoring out a negative 5 is going to leave us with x minus 1, because if you divide 5 by negative 5, it's going to give you negative 1. And the reason for doing this is now, when we look at the two terms we have left over, we will have a match. We have an x minus 1 and an x minus 1. So again, just like we did in the last problem, we're going to factor that out front. So let's talk about for a second, just in case you forget to do this. If you forgot to factor out the negative, what's going to happen is you would have plus 5 multiplied by negative x plus 1. And so the negative x plus 1 obviously wouldn't quite match with the x minus 1. And so if you don't get a match after you do the greatest common factor of your first two and your last two terms, then you may want to go back and look at factoring out a negative, because then it will make us have a match, the x minus 1 and the x minus 1. And so now, again, let's factor out the common term, or the common item from our two terms, and that's going to be the x minus 1. And if we factor out x minus 1 from our x squared times x minus 1, that's going to leave us with just x squared. And if you factor away the x minus 1 from negative 5 times x minus 1, that's just going to leave you with a negative 5. And so again, the x squared just comes right down, and the negative 5 just comes right down. And so our answer is x minus 1 multiplied by x squared minus 5. Again, you would want to double check this just in case you could factor further, but in this case we can't. So that's your final answer.